Hari Om. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Our Sadar pranams to our Gurus. Team Param Vedanta welcomes you all. Tomorrow, we are celebrating Ganesh Chaturthi all over the country with grandeur and bhakti. Ganesha is a god of wealth, sciences, knowledge, wisdom, and prosperity. And hence, new mission, new journeys, writing new books, etc. starts. He is also called as Vigneshwara, and hence he is worshipped before embarking on any new mission journey to seek his blessings. Param Vedanta wishes you all a very happy Ganesh Chaturthi. Today is the 11th session of Tripti Deepa. We will be covering verses 145 to 165. Swami Vidyaranya is covering the second line of the Brihadaranyaka mantra. He analyzes the desires of the wise man in great details. But first, we will get a recap of last week's verses 127 to 143 from Rama Ma'am. Over to you, Rama Ma'am.
Hari Om, Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Recap of the verses from 127 to 143 that we studied in the last session. In the verse 127, we learned that Nididhyasanam and worldly transactions cannot go together. Swami Vidyaranya says that although Dvaita Vyavaharas cannot be avoided completely, try to reduce the avoidable Vyavaharas that talk about Jiva Ishvara Bheda or highlighting it. These Vyavaharas either distract from Brahmabhyasam or cause addiction to them. It may look even eating or bathing cause distractions. Basic unavoidable Vyavaharas like eating, etc. should be performed to maintain the body. A short period of not focusing on the absolute does not cause any distraction for Brahmabhyasam. The kings like Janaka and Ajatashatru were involved very much in the Dvaita Vyavaharas. Through Nididhyasanam, they had realized the absolute. Abiding in it, always conducted their duties just to exhaust prarabdha karmas. It is because of their firm knowledge of the absolute, they could perform both simultaneously. For a sadhaka, a period of undivided attention to the absolute is absolutely necessary. The flame of knowledge kindled through Shravanam and Mananam should be strengthened to Nididhyasanam. At that time, any Laukika Vyavaharas can put out the flame of knowledge, and therefore Shastra says, Anya Vacho Vimunchatha, and hold on to the Nididhyasana. Janaka had made the knowledge like a forest fire, and thereafter the well-established Jagan Mithyatva did not disturb that fire. The rope will not get crushed under the weight of our perceived snake. Similarly, no event in Gnani's life is a burden. They continue to play the role as an emperor like Janaka, or as a husband, a wife, a daughter, son, all doing their duties. Now the question is, does the Gnani have prarabdha karmas? Prarabdha karmas are same for both Gnani and an Agnani. Their responses to them are different because of the insight of the knowledge of the self. Swami Vidyaranya illustrates this with an example. Two travelers, say a Gnani and an Agnani, having the same destination, say moksha, equally tired, one walks enthusiastically ahead, knowing his destination is close by, enjoys his journey. The other, unaware of it, is tired by the burden of the journey. Vidhi nishedhas, or his own will, or raga dvesha do not govern a gnani's life, but for his own prarabdha karmas. Hence, any karma or its effects will not affect the gnani, so his actions will not transgress righteousness. This you can see in the next slide. The firm knowledge of Brahma Satyatva and Jagan Mithyatva strengthens the mind, decreases FIR, and increases calmness, cheerfulness, and confidence. He has overcome the obstacles like Pramana, Prameya, Asambhavanas, the interpretational and logical obstacles, and also Viparita Bhavana, the emotional obstacles. With Shloka 134, the commentary ends on Aparoksha Gnanam, the fifth stage, as seen in the first line, and Gnana Phala Rupa Shoka Nivrittihi, as mentioned in the second line of Bruhadaranyaka Upanishad mantra. He elaborates the second line and talks about the sixth stage, which is Shoka Nivrittihi. The import of the first line is that the wise man gains direct knowledge of the self and firmly abiding in it eliminates false notions of kartrutva and bhoktrutva. Triputi is bhokta, bhoga, and their link, the bhogya. All triputis used for vyavahara gets falsified. When Advaita Brahman is recognized, the entire Dvaita Prapancha is negated. Once that is obtained, none remains to desire. Therefore, Triputi Nivrutti leads to Ichcha Nivrittihi, and he does not run after mithya worldly pleasures. Now, what are the objects that the Gnani desire? Swami Vidyaranya says that from the Gnani's point of view, the Upanishadic words Kimichan implies Bhogya Nishedha, Kasya Kamaya implies Bhokta Nishedha, and by implication, all the Bhoga Ichhas are negated. When Bhokta, the desirer, Bhogya, the desired, are falsified, naturally Bhoga Pravritti goes away. In the verse 136, Swami Vidyaranya says, its results as Santapaha Shamayet, meaning the Trupti Nishedha, Triputi Nishedha ceases sufferings like burning lamp stops without oil. Now he wants to say that for a Gnani from Paramarthika Drushti, the whole universe is mithya, like the rope snake. He knows that he is the Brahman, the absolute source of bliss, happiness, and fulfillment. Through Viveka, he has practiced dosha darshanam and he has developed vairagyam towards them. He sees doshas like B-A-D, all in capital letters, meaning bandhakatvam, atruptikaratvam, and dukkhakaratvam in so-called pleasure-giving sense objects. They only reflect the Atmananda. Swami Vidyaranya refers to examples from Yoga Vasishta and other scriptures to show that a Gnani will not have Ichha for a Mithya Vastu. The entire universe is Apata Ramana, which is very attractive superficially. Man desires wealth and sense pleasures as a source of peace, security, and happiness. The downside of pleasures is reflected upon in the verses 139 and 140. Regarding inert objects like wealth, acquiring and maintaining them is stressful and is only a pain. He talks about the attachment to Chetana Vastu like pets or any other person. He sees their body as a puppet made up of mass of flesh, bones, etc. He views the body within the body as the manifestation of the divinity within. Scriptures point out these defects of the sense objects. A Gnani, as a part of Nididhyasana, intensely assimilates the truth of Anatma. In the verse 142, Swami Vidyaranya gives a beautiful example to show that a Gnani is not trapped by any sense objects. A person after sumptuous and royal meal will not go for stale or poisoned food. He sees BAD, the threefold poison mixed with Vishayananda. Why should a Gnani run after this poisonous food? Says Sri Vidyaranya. And he says, because of prarabdha janita karmas, Gnani also can have non-binding karmas. A contract laborer does the job without developing attachment in the field. He is aware that he is not the owner, but only a temporary worker. Similarly, Gnani neither dwells in pleasures nor get attached to them, but for the force of prarabdha karmas. Next question is, what will be the cause of desires of a Gnani? It will be answered in today's verses that we will study. Thank you. Hari Om. Namaste. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Thank you very much, Ramaji, for an excellent and a very clear presentation of all the verses we studied in the last class. Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane Savilasa Mahamoha Graha Grasaika Karmane Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purushaha Kimichan Kasya Kamaya Shariram Anusam Jvaret. In the last class, we completed a very thorough analysis of the first line of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purushaha. This is a Mahavakya very similar to Ayam Atma Brahma. And with this thorough analysis, all of us should now be clear that Purusha refers to my lower transactional self. In reality, I am the Atma. Now, this message should be very clear, both in our conscious mind and in our subconscious mind, if the next set of verses have to be clear. There is one verse here which I have highlighted called Ched. Ched means if this is clear. But for all of us who have put in so much effort, let us now assume and let us pretend that we have understood, and from on we act like, both in our conscious and subconscious, that I have understood, and therefore I'm going to play my role like a Jnani. What is the implication? The implication is the 5 capsules that Swamiji wants us to remember all the time. If I have understood the first line, Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purusha, means I'm no longer this limited body-mind complex, but I am of the nature of eternal and all-pervading consciousness. I am Nityaha, Shuddhaha, Buddhaha, Muktaha. I am the only source of permanent peace, security, and happiness. Every other source of joy that I get is actually a reflection of my own peace, security, and happiness. By my mere presence, I live in this body. I, as Atma, have the ability to live in this body and mind. And through this body and mind, I have the ability to experience this whole universe. I am clear that as Atma, I am of a higher order of reality than this body and mind. And with this body and mind come everything on Atma, including my family, my friends, my possessions, my profession, and so on. And therefore, anything that happens to the material world, this material body, cannot really affect me as long as I remember this all the time. By forgetting this, my life can instantly become a burden. And by remembering this, and this is our objective, all the time, in all situations, that I have to remember, I am Atma Brahma, which will make my life a blessing. This discussion on the first line concluded in verse 134 with a key word called Janan. Janan means clearly knowing, while knowing this fact at all time. In this verse, Marge Gantro Dvayo Shranto. Shrantaha means exhausted. So there are two travelers on the same path. Both of them are completely exhausted. Samayam aduratam. Both of them are equidistant from the goal. But between the two, one of them is a Janan. Janan means he knows. What does he know? That my goal is just round the corner. Because he knows he has understood the first line, and therefore he is spiritually wise. And that wisdom has given dhairya and that sort of enthusiasm. And because that dhritam gachet, he is able to go through his prarabdha with a great sense of enthusiasm. Whereas the other means the one who forgets that. Anyaha tishtati dina dihi. His mind is overwhelmed by his prarabdha problems and he just gives up. We don't have to think it as two different people. We have learned in Mundaka about the upper bird and the lower bird. And we can see the upper bird is none other than the Atma Tattva when I remember my higher self. Although I am exhausted by my own prarabdha karma, the moment I log on to my higher nature, from nowhere a zeal and enthusiasm comes, because now I know my spiritual journey is coming to the end. But if I forget it, I identify and tend to give up like the lower bird. It looks like our spiritual journey is over, but then when we enter into the second line, we realize we have still some work to do. The law of karma is taught to us in the late stages of Vedanta. What is this law of karma? The law of karma says every action that I do has a consequence. Whatever you sow, so you reap. And therefore, we need to be very conscious about the type of actions that we do. Every action will produce a consequence. It is a visible or drishta palam and an invisible or an adrishta palam. Here, I would like to focus on what are these called vasanas. What are vasanas? Before that, we know the karma can be classified because from now on, there will be a lot of focus on the prarabdha karma. Our accumulated past karmas are called sanchita. Whatever I have to go through in my life is called the prarabdha. And then the karma that I do in my day-to-day life is called agami. At this stage, the teacher will reveal to us that even a jnani will not have sanchita karma, will not have agami karma. But the great revelation is prarabdha karma will continue. And prarabdha will continue to affect even a jnani. Of course, for an ajnani, it affects the bhokta, that means the experience in me. Because of my past karmas, I will experience certain punya, and therefore I experience happiness. And whenever I experience papa, that means I experience sorrow. There is a karta in me, and the karta in me is affected by vasanas. Let us understand what these vasanas are. Vasanas are also called samskaras. Whenever we do an action repeatedly, there is a certain shortcut formed in the mind called an engram, and these engrams are stored in the mind. And these engrams force us to do actions. Now, if you look into our life, we have a lot of shubha vasanas, which are good and which help us in our spiritual journey. And there are certain bad vasanas that we have accumulated. Whenever we do an action, if you get some happiness out of it, we tend to repeat that action. And therefore, you like to do certain things. Whenever we have some unpleasant results of our action, we would like to avoid it. Over a period of time, we develop strong likes and strong dislikes. And these become our tendencies or vasanas. The Shastras say we must submit ourselves to good current of vasanas and resist ourselves being carried away by our past tendencies, which can be very strong, these vasanas. Therefore, you will understand some of the verses that will be discussed in class today, because we, in our own lives, sometimes we will see, sometimes I know whatever I'm doing is wrong, but I'm compelled to do it. Why is it so? What is that power that controls my free will? How can I be a master of my fate? And this is through understanding of a vasana. Whenever an action is done, initially we are clumsy, we have to put in a lot of effort. But the more we do it, the mind creates a certain shortcut. And these tendencies that happen in our mind, and this can happen to any food habit, like coffee drinking or tea drinking, or even other habits like alcohol and so on. And once it becomes a vasana, it not only affects the bhokta in me, it forces us to repeat those actions, and therefore the karta in me is also affected. So spiritual life involves vasana kshaya, especially ashubha vasanas, by alert living. Swamiji talks to us about pratipaksha bhavana. That means deliberately entertaining the opposite thoughts. Supposing I feel incomplete by myself, I need to relate to somebody. Remind yourself, my true nature is asangoham, 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 punah punah. Sometimes when I feel old and weak, remind yourself, naham deham, I'm not my body. When I feel I'm limited in some way, remind ourselves, I am purnaha. Therefore, vasana kshaya is the next thing that we have to work in our life towards being a jivan mukta. And this comes through alert living or nidityasanam. Therefore, look at Vedanta friendly vasanas or shubha vasanas. With this background, let us look into the verses of today's class, because now we are dealing primarily about a person who has understood the first line, and therefore such a person is called a jnani. A person who's got spiritual jnanam, is he affected by prarabdha karma? Is a jnani affected by vasanas? The answer is certainly yes. And that's why some jnanis are so active, some jnanis tend to be not so active. So they are activity. But basically, a jnani is very clear that I have nothing to do, I have nowhere to go, I have to pass my time. Let me do it in the service of people. I'm not doing it as a service to do for any other form of fulfillment. I'm doing out of fulfillment, out of purnatvam, knowing about the three doshas, knowing everything that the world itself is mithya, and I don't have to try to improve a mithya world. To conclude again, what is moksha? Moksha is that stage when my free will is entirely free of all binding vasanas. That means there will be no motive, there is no selfish motive, but still there will be a motive. And what is the motive? Such a person is now tuned to the total, and whatever actions will come will be as directed by the total. Our opening speaker will be Neeta. Neeta, please.
Hari Om. Vidyaranya now explains the second line of the Bija mantra. The second line is Kim Ichan Kasya Kamaya Shariram Anusamjaret. He explains Kim Ichan in these verses. Sage Yajnavalkya is posing a rhetorical question. Knowing one's true nature, knowing that the self is complete, Sampurna, what can he desire? In the slide, next slide, we will see why a jnani doesn't desire. There can be several reasons, and the first reason is he feels fulfilled. He's aham purnaha iti janami. He knows I am full, complete. Then what desires can he have? The second reason is Jagat Mithyatvam. He knows that the Jagat is not so real, and therefore, what can he desire from the unreal world? Just like the mirage water cannot remove the thirst of the people, the universe, being not so real, cannot fulfill the desires. The third reason is, we've discussed this before, being a sadhana chaturthya sampanna, he knows the drawbacks of being fulfilling worldly desires. They have, they never give full satisfaction. They only leave us wanting more, and their dependence causing. We have covered this before, and it gives kabhi khushi, kabhi gum. Knowing these drawbacks, the jnani will not desire. So, does that mean the jnani has no desires at all? None? What makes a jnani get out of bed? What drives the jnani then? We know after Jivan Mukti, life continues. Atma Jnanam destroys Sanchita Karma, prevents any future further Agami Karma, but the prarabdha continues. So I'll just explain that. A jnani has prarabdha-driven desires. That is what drives him to continue with his daily chores, to go to work, to cover his mortgage, do his responsibilities. He does not drag his day. In the next slide, this is important. This is the take-home message for these two, for the two verses. Vidyaranya refines the statement. Even when we say jnani does not have desires, we have to include the adjective, he does not have binding desires. He can have non-binding moral and ethical desires, and thousands of them. Swamiji calls it ABCD, appropriate, balanced, clean desires. These desires will not create samsara for him, as he will fulfill them with detachment, and it will not affect his moksha either. Negation of desire is negation of binding, unethical, unsatiable desires. Non-binding means mentally prepared to lose without being miserable, enjoy without being greedy or guilty. Coming to the verse, Vidyaranya explains, for the jnani, going about his worldly life is not an affliction. He has no sense of regret or reluctance. He is prepared to lose the losable. The word here used is klesha, not in the sense of pain and sorrow, but rather, Vidyaranya clarifies, it refers to an attitude of detachment. He works with dispassion, viraktata. Due to the sense of complete fulfillment, nothing that happens during the day can add or subtract to the fullness or limitlessness of the jnani. He doesn't take things seriously, and he does not feel guilty when he is with his children and family members. And when a jnani has to go through sorrow, he goes through sorrow and through the pain, but with no fuss. In the next slide, we see the next verse. Vidyaranya explains, even little amount of sense pleasure gives him immense fulfillment. Alpa bhoga, he says. And the jnani has a disciplined and a controlled mind. He knows how to handle his raga dvesha. He goes about his experiences as a leela. Yaha leela bhoga, he says. He works with total inner freedom. He takes full interest with dispassion, and when things go away, he does not miss them. He is a vidvat sannyasa. For example, King Ram, when he grew up, he knew very well that he will inherit the empire. But just before coronation, he was told that the kingdom he would not be given the kingdom, and he would have to live in the forest. Valmiki describes Rama in Ramayana as having no change in his face when he received the first news and nor when he received the second news. The arrival and the loss were both the same. That is the condition described in this verse. In conclusion, we will differentiate between the jnani and the ajnani's desires for a better understanding. The ajnani's desire is born out of ignorance, while that of a jnani's is born out of prarabdha. He too has deep-rooted vasanas and conditionings, but he understands the mithyatvam of his prarabdha. Then ajnani has binding desires and he's attached to the results, and which cause a samsara for him. Whereas the jnani has non-binding ethical moral desires. Remember, ABCD, which he carries out with detachment. He does not he does them for lokasangra and selfishly. The jnani is looking for permanent peace, security, and happiness in all these desires. But the jnani knows better. He fulfills his desires out of happiness, not for happiness. He won't be miserable or guilty to enjoy. goes through pleasures and pain in samatvam. He is satisfied with very little, we just discussed. The Ajnani's desires are born out of raga, dvesha, and the fulfillment of the worldly desires leads to addiction, wanting more. He is unaware of the doshas, the BAD. The biggest misconception people have is desires will go away or weaken if they are fulfilled. It is like adding fuel to the fire. It never is enough. It's unquenchable. This is what the Jnanis go through. Whereas the Jnani knows how to handle his desires. Like Shiva, he knows how to defang the poison out of the desires and make it a garland. Swamiji calls it Alankara. Hari Om. We will be listening to the non-binding desires of a Jnani in more details in the next 40 verses. Thank you. Thank you to my gurus.
Thank you, Neeta, for a very nice elaboration of these two verses, which tell us that even with spiritual knowledge, a person will go through prarabdha. So they will have prarabdha, they will have vasanas, but a jnani reminds himself that it should not be binding, it should be moral, and it should have a sense of detachment. Can we have a sannyasi mind? What is a sannyasi mind? Anything losable, be prepared to lose. And remember, if you expect peace, security, and happiness from this world, that is a sure prescription for sorrow. In the next verse, we spoke about how a jnani, even a small amount of pleasure gives him a great fulfillment. Why? Because his mind is under control. The word used is nigrahita manasa. And for such a person, even a small alpaka api lila bhoga, that means he is able to take everything as a form of a celebration. And the word klishta has been explained again and again, not to take it as a suffering, but to take it as enjoy or experience your prarabdha with a sense of detachment. Shamala, please.
Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Here, Vidyaranya has given another beautiful example of the Jnani's attitude. The verse goes like this. Baddha mukto mahi palaha grama matrena tushyati parairna baddho na krantaha narashtram bahumanyate. Next slide, please. Imagine a king was attacked and captured by another king, and the whole kingdom has been lost, and he was kept in jail for several years. There was a rumor that he was going to be killed also. The king thought that I have lost everything, including my life also. Next slide, please. One day, the other king who has captured him called and said, I am going to release you. This king was extremely happy, and he has come from bondage to liberation. Baddha muktaha mahi palaha. Even by this mere release and getting back the life, this person is already purna tripta. Then the other king again says, I have decided to give you one village. Are you satisfied? What will this king say? Even without anything, he was happy because he became liberated. Now, getting a village, he is overjoyed. Grama matrena tushyati. A liberated person is already happy because he is released by samsara, the sorrow of the slavery. Next slide, please. The other king who has never been captured by anyone, such a person doesn't come under Baddha Mukta variety. He has a huge kingdom. He is not happy. He says, Rashtram api na bahumanyate. Even the whole nation is not satisfying enough. Swami Paramarthananda gives an example of Mullah Nasruddin. One day, a lady was carrying a handbag and walking. And Mullah went near her and snatched the bag. Naturally, that lady started chasing. He went round and round, and after some time, He himself went and gave back the bag. The lady embraced the handbag and was so happy. I have this bag with me. Then Mullah asked, the very same bag 10 minutes ago was with you, but at that time you were not expressing this. When you lost it and got back, it appears as though a great joy. Similarly, what is Mokshananda? It is ours only. Because of ignorance, we have disclaimed it, and when we get back, we are happy. This is Baddha Muktaha. Next slide, please. Jnani also may have certain desires caused by prarabdha karma, and that was explained from verse 143 up to 150. Now, the verse 151 goes like this. Viveke jagrati sati dosha darshana lakshane kathamarabdha karmapi bhogechham janayishyati. Next slide, please. Here, it begins with Purva Paksha, an opposite point of view, which introduces a question: how can a jnani have a desire if the desire is caused by avidya? We say when avidya goes away, then kama also goes away, karma also will go away. This is the standard law we have applied. Now Purva Pakshi asks, how do you talk about kama of a jnani when the cause of kama has been already removed? Viveka jagrati sati, jnani has got viveka, atma, anatma, viveka alive in his head all the time. Jnani knows Atma is the only source of joy, and that Anatma doesn't have any joy at all. He also knows that the world cannot give happiness, but can give sorrow if I get attached to it. Even the dosha darshanam Jnani has got. Therefore, he says, dosha darshana lakshane viveke. Dosha darshanam is the world has dukkha mishritatvam, atriptikaratvam, and bandhakatvam. Seeing these three doshas together is called viveka. Under this situation, katham bhoga ichcham jana ishyati. How can bhoga ichcha arise in the jnani's mind, the desire for sense pleasures? Such a situation appears illogical. And even if you say prarabdha karma is producing that, tell me how can prarabdha karma produce the desire when ajnanam is absent and dosha darshanam is alive? However hungry a person be, once he knows the food is mixed with poison, one will not be ready to eat that food. For a jnani, the world is mixed with poison, and so how can prarabdha karma produce bhoga ichcha, the desire for sense pleasures? Katham arabdha karma api bhoga ichcham jana ishyati. How is it possible? For this, Vidyaranya is going to answer in the next verse. Thank you. Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Thank you very much, Shamala. That was an excellent presentation of these two verses allotted to you, with very nice illustrations giving us a very clear position about that story of the king who lost his kingdom and was given one village. We are like that. After studying the first line, we were in samsara for so long, and suddenly we have a sense of being released by Maya Devi. And therefore, although like that person whose mullah's bag was snatched and given back, nothing has happened. We need to be able to relish the meaning of the first line and experience what it is to be free from samsara. Shamala also explained the next key verse. Is it possible for a jnani to have any desires? Because normally we know all desires are based on this phrase, avidya kama karma. A jnani is a vidwan. How can a karma come? How will a karma come? This is the question. Also the same verses, Atmanam ched vijaniya tayam asmiti purusha kim michan. So this verse also says that a jnani cannot have any desire. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogata. So all these verses. So from now on, Vidyaranya does a wonderful analysis that even a person with spiritual knowledge, even a spiritually awake person, who knows the nityatvam of the world, who knows dukkha mishritratva, atripti karatvam, still can have desires. And then you have a beautiful classification of prarabdha karma that we will hear from Kirti. Kirti, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Triptideepa verses 152 and 153. Na esha dosha yato aneka vidam prarabdam ikshate ichha nichha parecha prarabdam trividam smritam. In these shlokas, Swami Vidyaranya comments on the second line of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. He explains Kim Ichan portion here. The previous verse has introduced a doubt and Purva Paksha questions. How can a Gnani with Viveka Jagriti? First, in this verse, Swami Vidyaranya says Purva Paksha's objection is not correct. The charge being made on the Gnani is improper. Swami Paramarthananda explains that it is generally said that desires are caused by avidya. Avidya begets kama and kama begets karma. But we have learned from the scriptures that in the case of a gnani, the fire of wisdom, jnanagni, has destroyed his avidya, thus removing desires and thereby the ownership of sanchita karmas. Therefore, gnani's desire is not caused by avidya because self-knowledge has removed its avarana and vikshepa. To acknowledge gnani's desire, we need to understand that desire is a shakti. By merely being a human being, one possesses Trivida Shakti called Ichha, Gnana and Kriya Shakti, along with Prarabdha Karma Phala and has desired moksha. There is no defect in accepting desire for a Gnani. It is caused by fructifying Prarabdha, which is a subset of Sanchita Karma. Swami Paramarthananda explains further. Whenever one performs some action repeatedly, it produces two types of consequences. Karma phala for the karta, and the very performance of karma creates a habit or vasana in the karta. Similarly, prarabdha karma has prarabdha phala and prarabdha vasana aspects. Prarabdha janita kama starts operating in every jiva from birth. Gnani's prarabdha karma does not go away as soon as he gets enlightened. The momentum of his prarabdha karma keeps him alive. His prarabdha is still prabala and its vasanas influences the kartritva in him and the phala creates fulfillment of his desires. Gnani is a karta and bhokta in vyavaharika level, even though from paramarthika drishti, both of them are falsified. Jnani's vyavaharika karta nature is heavily influenced by prarabdha vasana. This prarabdha vasana is not only of the previous janma, but also of this janma from birth till the dawn of enlightenment, that is Purva Ashrama lifestyle. Swami Vidyaranya divides prarabdha karma into three types to explain how the force of prarabdha karma becomes functional in our lives. They are Ichha, Parecha, and Aniccha prarabdha. Ichha prarabdha. The force of this prarabdha is prabala. The vasanas or desires which have fructified into results are so strong that they perforce create desire in the mind of the person. Gnani's karta is influenced, which engages him in action to attain the desired object and enjoy it thereafter. Example, coffee vasana. Parecha prarabdha are those results that come to us because of others' desires. Gnani does not have any personal desire. His karta is not influenced. But because of somebody else's desire, Gnani goes through certain experiences. Here, it is not prarabdha vasana which is affecting him, but prarabdha phala that affects him. For example, a person experiences his spouse's prarabdha also. Aniccha prarabdha. Those results or enjoyments which come without conscious desire arising in the mind, neither swecha or parecha. It is undesired, unasked for experience. Example, physical ailments, unhealthy conditions experienced by the Gnani's body, diseases, old age, pains come under this category. Every Gnani experiences all these types of prarabdha and conditioned by his svabhava, sadhana, with akarta and sakshi bhava, he will continue to exhaust his prarabdha with natural ethical desires. Verse 153. Apatya sevinas chora rajadhara rata api jananta eva svanartham icchanti arabdha karmatah. In this verse, Swami Vidyaranya continues Ichha Prarabdha, and here he is speaking about a samsari. Even though people who eat unhealthy food, thieves, and those who want to have illicit relationship with the queen certainly know the dangerous consequences thereof to themselves, yet they desire and act because of their fructifying prabala prarabdha vasanas. He says, prabala prarabdha vasanas influence the karta, compels one to go after something one wants, and through these activities, bhoktas experience anartham. They invite self-harm and punishment for themselves. For example, diabetics desire to eat sweets and Ravana's adharmic activities. That person's will has bowed down to prabala ichha prarabdha vasana. This describes how a person knowingly succumbs to binding desires. In Gnani's ichha prarabdha, that ichha is non-binding, moral, harmless desires which do not affect his gnana or moksha. Fulfillment of Gnani's desire do not have the capacity to breed more to enslave him. Even Bhagwan had desire to create the world, and therefore there is nothing wrong in Gnani having non-binding desires. With regard to this fructifying prarabdha, it cannot be stopped even by God. So says Lord Krishna to Arjuna in the Gita. Thank you, sir. Harihi Om.
Thank you very much, Kirti, for a nice explanation of these two verses. Here we see Vidyaranya Swami's brilliance in his detailed analysis of prarabdha karma is of three types. Ichcha, based on one's desires, aniccha, that happens whether you like it or not, and parecha, when you do it for the sake of somebody else. We also have discussed about vasanas, and which has been nicely explained how the karma phala affects the future bhokta, whereas the karma vasanas affect the future karta by creating a form of an addiction. And this affects even a jnani, and that is why ajnanis are of different nature, some active and some passive. We already discussed about this problem of vasanas. I know these vasanas can be so strong, they can compel me to do what I don't want to do. And how can I avoid them? By the pratipaksha bhavana, deliberately entertaining the alternative or the opposite thought, by being alert living and through nidithyasanam and creating Vedanta-friendly Shubha vasanas. Kulkarni, please.
Hari Om, Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Pujya Swami Vidyaranaji, while continuing the explanation on prarabdha, he clarified that it is very powerful and it has an effect on nature of jnanis and ajnanis. Even the celestial gods cannot alter the result of prarabdha karma. They are governed by the law of karma. Swamiji divides the prarabdha karma phalas into three types, namely Ichha prarabdha, Aniccha prarabdha, and Parecha prarabdha. Swamiji explained in detail about Ichha prarabdha from the previous verses from 152, verse number 152 onwards. Now in this verse, Aniccha prarabdha is explained, and which is taken from Bhagavad Gita 18th chapter of 16th verse. Svabhavajena kaunteya nibaddhasvena karmanam kartum nechasi yan mohat karishyasya vashopi tata. O Arjuna, the actions that arise from your inherent nature hold you in a bind, and this will lead you to perform even that which you may resist, all because of the clouded state of delusion. There are something which we like and enjoy the fruits, and something consciously don't desire not to happen, but will be compelled to do action against our will and suffer with the pleasant or unpleasant results of action, and such experiences are anicca prarabdha. A smoke addicted person who decided to quit the smoking after convincing its bad effect, sometimes he will be forced helplessly and compelled to smoke by the pressure of bad company or undesired situation and experience pleasant or unpleasant feelings. In this verse, Bhagavan alerts the Arjuna that you will be forced to fight the war against your free will, to face Drona and Bhishma because of your Svabhava, which is of rajasic nature. Slide, sir. Generally, the individual performs innumerable action of different varieties, good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, with a notion of doership I. The karmas which have not given results get accumulated, or they are all sanchita karma. Out of which karmas which have started giving results, they are prarabdha karma. The results of fructified karmas that create a desire by himself and enforce a person in experiencing a result of action, they are called iccha prarabdha. The results of karmas which without conscious or desire arising in the mind, they are called anicca prarabdha. Last, the results of action fructified that come because of others' desire, they are called parecha prarabdha. It is to be noted here that whether we get the result through our own desire or unasked by us or due to others' desire, they are results of our own action only, which plays an important role in molding the individual nature or svabhava. Next slide, sir. The Parecha Svabhava is explained in the next verse, that is 162. Na nichantu na ichantaha paradakshinya sanyutaha sukha dukkhe bhajentyapte parecha purva karmahi. Those who possess compassion, neither driven by the reluctance or sheer willingness, engage in actions for the betterment of others, they undergo feelings of both joy and suffering. This is due to a parecha prarabdha, and we observe, next slide, sir. We observe the life of great men and Mahatmas of compassionate heart and desire parecha prarabdha for the welfare of others. In the life of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who willingly took the disease of his devotees to relieve the unbearable pain and suffering to save him. Another example of can be quoted, a Gondavalikar Maharaja, who experienced the parecha prarabdha to guide his devotees in the right path. It is a common experience of the individual who are compassionate at heart and unselfish to relieve the heavy financial burden of their close friends and relatives, experience a parecha prarabdha, pleasant or unpleasant. More of discussion on prarabdha only in the next few verses. Hari Om, Guru.
Thank you very much, Kulkarni ji, for a very nice explanation of these two verses that are allotted to. The last verse that you explained, 162, talks about parecha prarabdha. Para dakshina samyuttaha means a person From now on, we need to identify with those who have understood the first line, and therefore we have some spiritual wisdom. And therefore, sometimes for the sake of others, we will have to undergo certain experiences, both pleasurable or painful, and that are called parecha prarabdha. Our last speaker of today will be Dr. Chandrakala. Dr. Chandrakala, please.
Hey, Gurubhyo Namaha. Verse 163, 7th chapter. Here Vidyaranya Swami raises a question in Purva Paksha, first line, and answers in the second line through analysis. Katam tarhi kimichanati evam icha nishidyate. Does this desire not contradict the verse that says he is desireless? In previous verses, Vidyaranya Swami has established that Danis do have icha or desire caused by prarabdha vasanas. This contradicts the statement in Brihadaranya Upanishad, which negates desires in Danis. Next slide, sir. In slide 2, Tritidipa, first verse we have learnt earlier, second line. Kimichan kasya kamaya shariram anusanjvare. After attaining Nana, desiring Ahankara and Bhogya Prapancha is gone. When desiring subject and desiring object is negated, there is no desire. Come back to slide 1, sir. Second line. Necha nisheda kinchitva badho bharjita bijavat. Na icha nishedaha. The verse does not negate icha, but icha badaha. There are two kinds of negation here. Nishedaha means something is totally removed. If I say it is rope, not a snake, snake is removed totally. Icha badaha. I hold a pot and say it is not a pot, only a clay. Pot remains present in my perception. Pot is not real, but clay is real. Pot is negated to discover mithyatva, called baditaha, negation of desires. Let me discuss this little more. In an unenlightened person, if there is a desire of something, it can be an object, person, or environment, it goes to the extent, I want it, I need it. So he concludes that his welfare depends on getting that object. In the absence of fulfilling that desire, he suffers. In enlightened person, where he gets that object or not, whether he gets that object or not, it doesn't matter. He never suffers, as his nature is Satchidananda Atma, that is whole and complete. His experience of the enlightened person is Bhavita Anuvritti. Experience continues but remains unchanged. Bharjita Bijavat. Gnani's desire is like roasted seed. Roasted seed is physically present but loses its capacity to germinate when planted. Desire in Gnani's mind has got sufficient capacity to give bhoga or pleasure at the time of entering the mind, but it does not get overwhelmed. The mind does not get stuck, unlike an unenlightened person where it remains for hours or days. When Agnani likes something, if he doesn't get it, he develops krodha. It builds up to vyasana, gets deeper. And if he gets something what he loves, he gets to attachment, addiction, finally anxiety of losing it. Now is not only thinking of self, but also family causes entanglement. So this is where Gnani escapes. Gnani does not get entangled. Let us take a jackfruit example. Jackfruit has highly sticky substance. If you don't know how to handle it, hand gets stuck to the right hand, then to the left hand, and everywhere wherever it touches. Wise man applies coconut oil before entering. He applies coconut oil, that is Gnana. After applying coconut oil, he enters jackfruit. That oil Gnani doesn't have. In verse 164, so it explains that Gnani's desire doesn't cause dependence. Why? On account of his realization of illusory nature of the world. In the verse 165, it explains why desires are like burned seeds in enlightened person and unburnt in an unenlightened person. Datta bijam arohipi bakshanayopa yujyate vidvat icha api alpa bogaha Kuryan na vyasanam bahu. Dagda bijam is burn seed. Enlightened person has icha, but it is arohi api. Useless for planting, but it is useful for eating. For unenlightened person, when he commits any action to fulfill his desires, that results in adrishta pala, that fructifies later to seed and results in punarjanma. Vidvat icha alpa bhogam. In enlightened person, desires create a small enjoyment or experience, but there is no possibility to later fructification because ego is burnt. No karta, no bhokta, incapable of any action because enlightened person act in the absence of free will. So, no new karma, but he exhausts the result of old karmas. Kuryan nah vyasanam bahu. Desires gives small experience but no suffering in enlightened person and complete acceptance of the reality of the moment. Hence, he is freedom. And suffering persists when there is resistance to accept it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakala, for a nice explanation of these two verses with very useful illustrations. So the Purva Paksha brings the same question once again. Kim Michan, how is it a jnani can have desires? And this gives an opportunity for Vidyaranya Swami to say, it is possible for a jnani to have desires, but a jnani knows that these are only mithya. There is no real fulfillment from that because he is already fulfilled and therefore they are not binding desires. And of course, because of his sadhana chatusthya, they are moral and legitimate also. A new idea has come, which was also there in the Bhagavad Gita, about the roasted seed. A roasted seed has lost its capacity to germinate. That means by a jnani's karma, because there is no sense of doership, there is no question of punarjanma. There is no vyasana, there is no mental entanglement, given nicely in the example of a wise person handling jackfruit by putting oil. So jnani or jnanam is compared to oil. And if you have that oil of spiritual wisdom, you can interact with the world, but not get stuck to it and not have any binding desires, because now you know that you can't be bound because everything is mithya. Just like a false rope, a false rope cannot bind you. It is only a real rope that can bind you. Neeta, please.
Our salutations to Vidyaranya Swami. Thank you, Dr. Hegde, and to the team. We learned that jnani can also have desires, but they are appropriate, balanced, clean desires, non-binding, moral, ethical. Next week, we go into further details of these desires. Session 12 will be premiered on Saturday, the 25th of September at 6:45 p.m. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om